Okay, so today I wanted to offer some reflections about boarding school syndrome and control. Why is it that we learn to be quite controlling, both of ourselves, our emotions, and of others? And what can we do to start to break this pattern of control? So, okay, enjoy. So, um, just reading through Nick's book this morning and also preparing last week for a boarding school survivors men's circle that I run every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks essentially. I do men's circle every 2 weeks, and the subject was control. So I thought I would just share some of the quotes from Nick about control, and then also offer some ideas about this. So essentially, you know, as ex-boarders, if you're in relationship with an ex-boarder, you'll find that we can be quite controlling. It's almost like because we had no control at school as children, we learned to control everything. And I'll read out a quote from Nick. But essentially, it means that we can be quite difficult to live with. How I also, with the work I'm now doing with this film, I'm seeing that what Nick is talking about, these 3 levels of dissociation, which I will talk about at some point. Basically, the first level is, if there's a part of us that we need to repress, we dissociate. That's the first level. Second is we put it onto others. And the third level is that the other person actually feels this. So if we're controlling ourselves, they then feel very controlled. So that's the third level dissociation. It's called projective identification. So, what I'm kind of wondering is if these ex-boarders who are, a lot of them are our leaders. In the UK, Rishi Sunak's just become the Prime Minister, and he was at boarding school from age 8. So he will have learned, as Nick Duffell says, everyone has to survive. So this new Prime Minister has been through exactly the same education that, many of these leaders have been through boarding school. So what then I'm thinking is, okay, if we learn to control at a young age, we're going to therefore learn to control others. That's just going to be what he's saying. If we can't acknowledge it within ourselves, it's shadow, it then, means that we're then projecting that out onto the world. So that's why it can sometimes feel, especially over the last few years, how controlled we've been, certainly in comparison with other countries. So here we go. So one of the quotes is, in practice, we can well imagine the little boy who has experienced his parents' care every day of his life so far may go into shock when being left by them in the confines of a huge, unfamiliar institution. This threshold experience, aptly described by Simon Partridge, means that the little boy soon realizes that he cannot in any way control his new environment. The next logical step is to control himself. And I found this myself at school. It was like I let my emotions up, I let some anger up, I let some tears, and I got laughed at, humiliated. So it was like, immediately I have to control myself. And how I did that was beating myself up internally, really hating myself. You're shit, whenever the emotions would come up, becoming a tyrant. The first thing to deal with is his evident fear at being alone and his sad feelings that go along with it, commonly known as homesickness, what Joy Shavrin talks about in the ABCD, the B, bereavement, homesickness. He has no other choice but to repress these feelings and to refuse to identify himself as one who has such emotions, because to be seen feeling these things would make him vulnerable amongst the other little boys who are busy toughening up. So exactly, that was what happened with me. I I kind of suppressed that. It's like, right, yeah, I'm not vulnerable. I can take care of myself. Then he goes on to say the dissociation by which the strategic survival personality resolves the original split between home and school keeps independence and dependent vulnerability locked up in quite separate parts of the psyche. The result of such an approach to life may give an outward appearance of self-sufficiency or even leadership as promoted by the boarding school ethos, but in fact it involves a desperate need to keep control. Yeah, a desperate need to keep control. So just to be aware of this, it's like, this control, that if you're in a relationship, or maybe you're starting to uncover some of these traits. It's like, yeah, I know I have to, it's like the shadow is behind us. We bring it to the light so we can go, this is a trait for us as exporters. We learn to control, not in a benevolent way. It wasn't a relaxed control. It was very, I've got to do this in order to survive. As Nick says, the child will do everything in order to survive. So even sacrifice that inner part of ourselves. So it's that control. So it's to become aware in our lives. First thing, mindfulness. I speak about this a lot. Mindfulness that we have this controlling nature, especially if we're tired, poorly, run down, we haven't slept well, the kids are up late. We can step into those old unconscious patterns of control that we went through 7 years, 10 years, 13 years if we were at school longer. Okay, so that's important to acknowledge that. So this mindfulness, I'm stepping into being controlling now. Take a breath. In for 4, out for 6. Just take a breath, and that will just break that routine. So these, I'll just go through a few of the things to help break the addiction to control. Second thing is meditation. So meditation just trains the mind to let go of thoughts, to be less controlling, thinking. Often as exporters, we're trapped in our minds. As Naomi Wolf talks about in one of her books, she says that when we have trauma, we can't escape, we disappear up into our head. Again, the ABCD of boarding school syndrome. Joy says C is captivity. We couldn't escape. So where do we go? We disappear into our heads. So what we need to do with meditation, focus on a meditation object. When we go back into that thinking mind, drop into the feelings of the body. Drop into the meditation object, whether that be a candle, a mantra, following the breath in and out through the nose. That's the second thing. The next thing in relationships, certainly, is I learned this in the monastery, probably 2003. I'd really been struggling for a year, self-harming, suicide attempts. And I got to that point where I suddenly said, I let go of getting in my own way. I let go of getting my own way. And it was like, I've been so trying to control everything, how that person was, how that, control. And it was so much suffering. And I just, when I said that, the shoulders relaxed. I felt so much better. And that's been often a backdrop, especially in relationships. Often we can get into arguments. I'm right. And again, Nick Duffell talks about this, that's a key part of the strategic survival personality, is we can never admit that we're wrong. If you look at Boris Johnson, any of the politicians who've been to boarding school, Tony Blair, the Iraq War, he's never admitted that he made a mistake, even though tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people died. Even though the evidence is out now that there was no mass weapons of mass destruction, yet still he hasn't admitted a mistake because of this, in order to keep the strategic survival personality, as Nick calls it, in place, then we have to just never admit we're wrong. So that's part of the solution. Start to admit, I let go of getting my own way. And in relationship, especially for men, women as well, is to go, maybe they're right. That's a really hard one for us to say as exporters. Maybe she's right. We're so adamant, no, this is the way, and we're stuck. It's like, maybe she's right. Maybe he's right. I won't share a story, but I have a great story there from Ajahn Chah, who's my teacher's teacher. Where is he? There. And another thing is, as well, this controlling thing is often, it's important in relationships or in life to point things out from time to time. But David Data, also kind of other relationship people talk about, that we need to have 5 positive interactions for every negative. And that means 5 times we praise our partners. For every time we go, can you do that? Or can you sort that out? Praise them 5 times. That balances it out. That kind of releases and relinquishes the control. Most of us, if we're really controlling, we'll do 5 pointing out for anything positive, if we ever say anything positive. And the relationship just breaks down. So, yeah, just some reflections about control. And yeah, just see, okay, this is a quality, negative quality of being to boarding school, and we can turn it around. We can, see it as a positive that, yeah, I can get into a great discipline. For me, I get up early, 6:30, 6 o'clock, and I meditate. I do my practice. I study. I've been reading Nick Duffell's book this morning. It's like, right, yeah, I study. So it's seeing it in a positive way, yeah, and turning it around. So yeah, any reflections, please do let me know. I've got a great interview this Friday with Matthew Green, who's a Reuters Financial Times journalist, or he was. He now works for DeSmog, an environmental news agency. And we're going to be talking about trauma, our leaders, and the environment. So it's going to be a fascinating discussion there. So yeah, wishing you well, and have a great week. Blessings.